So, welcome to another episode of the New York Information Security Meetup live session. I have the great pleasure to introduce Mark Loepker, who is the Senior Advisor and Education Lead for the National Cryptologic Foundation. So, Mark, thank you very much to get on the show. Much appreciated. It's it's a Friday afternoon, and we are live. So, thanks very much for joining. Much appreciated.
Oh, thanks a lot, David. It's really a pleasure to be here and to talk with you about this great, important topic of cybersecurity education.
So before we get started, you have a vast, background. Love to kind of dive a little deeper into what you've done and how you got to be part of this initiative.
Oh, excellent. Thanks. I started out my career as an Air Force officer back in the 70s. Back in those days, we were in the Cold War. And so I was an intercontinental ballistic missile launch officer,
Wow.
or ICBMs. Did that for 4 years. And then because of the nuclear business and my electrical engineering technology degree out of Purdue, I also took a full year of nuclear engineering. And so the Air Force found out about my nuclear engineering background, and I ended up at the Defense Nuclear Agency, which is now the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and did a lot of nuclear research, really enjoyed the research environment. So my Air Force career kind of went out of the operations environment and shifted really rapidly into the research and development environment, where I pretty much stayed the rest of my career, ending up at the Strategic Defense Initiative Organization, SDIO, which back in the Reagan years had the nickname Star Wars. It was our space-based.
I love it. But before we go in, Mark, so first of all, this is why I have people like yourself on the show. Like, it's just amazing, amazing background. And people can't knock on your door in the office and just talk shop with you. It's just so cool. So before we go in there, I was blown away. So you were responsible for partially, potentially launching nuclear missiles. I mean,
Yep.
We've seen a lot of these, on TV where you turn two keys and there's a couple people, and there's a lot of these doomsday scenarios where somebody made a mistake, or they thought they saw something. So before we get started, from a real, and you're laughing because you know what's coming.
Right.
From a real life perspective, is there stuff that we see in the movies? Is that real?
That's real. In fact, the movies that depict the two guys turning the keys simultaneously, that's real. Although the actual movie depicting us launching stuff, obviously that never happened, thank God. We called our job many hours of boredom interspersed by moments of stark terror. And so when we're out on alert, it was basically, that's one of the reasons the Air Force had a great program called a guaranteed master's. And so I got my master's in business administration, quantitative analysis, database design while I was on alert. And so when you're out there 24 hours at a time, you're 60 feet underground usually. The blast door is closed. No one can get in. That's where I did all my studying and all my term paper writing. Of course, back then we used typewriters, etc. And it was a very wonderful experience. I enjoyed my missile career duty. It really set me forth in a lot of future things in the Air Force. So there's guys still out there today on alert with our missile field. And so my hat's off to them.
So, Mark, hold on for a second again. So you were writing your thesis, I'm assuming some sort of bunker underground with the ability to basically end civilization as we know it.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
That gives a whole, the concentration, focus, a whole new meaning in terms of, be able to sit down and write your thesis. You had a lot of quiet time there. That's amazing.
A lot of quiet time and a lot of think time. I actually got to launch one.
Now, Mark, and again, if you don't mind, because this is such a fascinating topic and people don't typically get to, were you being evaluated from mentally, your attributes, under stress, all that stuff. I mean, I'm assuming they don't just pick anybody off the
In
shelf.
fact, we had a program called Personnel Reliability Program,
Hmm.
PRP. And so you're constantly under scrutiny. In fact, if I got a cold and took something as simple as a contact cold capsule, I would not be qualified to go on alert. And so I would be pulled off alert if I had a cold and taking some type of medication, because my thinking would be impaired, and my physical reactions would be impaired. I mean, you've had a cold and you take
Yeah.
contact or something like that, and you're kind of groggy. So you're not allowed to go on alert. We have plenty of launch officers, and there's a scheduler who takes care of all of that. So the personnel reliability program, if we had people, for instance, when my wife was pregnant and in the process of her towards the end of that 9-month cycle, when she was about ready to give birth, I was not allowed to go on alert because of that stressful time. And we've had launch officers pulled off alert when their wives go into labor. And so we fly a helicopter out, bring a new crew out, that crew changes out. So it's a very strict career field. I mean, we had a checklist for everything. We called it read a step, do a step, get a banana. Um,
What does that mean? Why get a banana?
well, it's the monkey. A monkey could do the job because it was a read a step, do a step, get a banana.
Uh-huh.
So it was just, the launch officer humor, right? Um, that we would have. So it was a very controlled environment, thank goodness, very highly trained, highly restricted environment. So enjoyed that part of my career.
Oh, I bet, and it's even get to the point where, okay, what if you get a parking ticket, and you like get so upset, it's like, okay, now I'm gonna get even. Um, of course, it's not just dependent on you, but I'm joking, of course. But there's a lot of other external forces that are, that can potentially, inhibit your thinking. But that's incredible.
Yeah,
So after that, but here's the thing, right? So Mark, what's going on is, even from my experience, you have this amazing skill set, right? That people typically don't get exposed to, but you kind of join the civilian forces, and there's not much need for something as elevated as this from a skill
right.
perspective. So you have a very niche skill perspective. So we talked to a lot of veterans in this show, and again, they do something amazing in the military, or the forces, and then they come back, and they have difficulty to apply that. So how was your transition to kind of the workforce, and coming back to the civilian life?
Well, David, that's a great question, and I really appreciate it, because I think it is important for my fellow veterans to understand that we may not find a one-to-one relationship. I hope I wouldn't find a one-to-one relationship.
That's true, Mark.
you know, but there is the attributes of what we did in the missile career field and what I did in research and development, et cetera. And so my Air Force career really expanded my abilities in research, my abilities in engineering, my abilities in the executive management aspects. One of my opportunities after coming out of Europe, I was my last job in the Air Force as a lieutenant colonel was the head of European cybersecurity
Hmm. Hmm.
for the European Command, and that put me on NSA's radar. And I landed at NSA for my last assignment,
Hmm.
which then I retired and became an NSA executive for another 18 years. And so I think our background in leadership, our background in stress, being able to handle that, our background in being able to take a look at a situation, properly dissect it, look at how to solve those problems. I think a lot of veterans potentially don't don't utilize and account for those great skills that we are given by our military service.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, in your opinion, is there somebody out there with the equivalent, type of cybersecurity button out there, and kind of the state driven button that that you turn a key,
Right.
you press a button, but instead of launching a physical attack, there's a doomsday scenario on the cybersecurity side. What's your thought about that?
Oh, that's a really good thought. I do believe as we begin to defend, as we begin to protect our systems, there are a lot of network operating centers now out there, security operating centers out there. I know I'm from the state of Indiana, is
Hmm.
my home state, and I know that they developed what they call the the Omni Security Operational Center. And they did that with the partnership of several universities, including my alma mater, Purdue.
Hmm.
And that is a center that is really watching what's going on the net and doing the defend and protect. But in that defending and protecting, those tool sets are there to potentially look at how to thwart actively
Hmm.
an adversary from taking over and from inflicting damage on a network. And so those types of operations, although they happen in cyberspace, and it's very difficult to see that because you can't touch and feel those ones and zeros
Hmm.
within the in the electronic environment, like you can in the physical environment. But it's no less different in its intellectual thinking and in its stress.
Yeah, I agree, and you can see that there's it's starting to be kind of a connection between the cybersecurity and the physical infrastructure. There's a lot of SCADA systems out there,
Oh,
and a lot of kind of a quote unquote doomsday scenarios where,
I just
some of the infrastructure goes down due to cyber attack. Um, does that concern you? Is that something that you ever, again, from, because I'm specifically asking you because you have this amazing, tremendous background. So whatever answer you give me, carries a lot of weight.
well, David, thank you for that that trust in my answers. But I would articulate it like this, David. I think that the the threats that are posed are no different than the kinetic threats that have been posed for the many years. The challenge we have is intellectually um, getting involved in cyberspace the same as we did in the kinetic space, the physical space. So there are still bad people out there. There are still thieves. I mean, just look at the pipeline. That was a theft operation. That was thieves wanting money. Okay, so it was extortion. We've had extortion all over the place for eons, right? Except in the physical space. So now those same adversarial activities, the thieves, the threats, etc., are now moving from that physical space into the cyberspace. So we need to really intellectually embrace that as a nation and as a human society, that the bad people have now moved into this cyberspace environment to where their attribution is very difficult sometimes. They can hide a lot easier. They can bounce around, as we all know, in the IT environment, that you can spoof, you can masquerade, all those different techniques to hide yourself. But the bad people are still there. Okay, so the bad people are going to affect our operations in a way that achieves their mission. Now, that could be a mission to totally shut down water, to totally shut down a power grid. It could be for money. It could be for other reasons to shut those infrastructures down. And so that's why this area of cybersecurity is so important to demystify the language, um, correlated a lot more with what we've done in the kinetic area to help inspire the kids, K to 12 kids. That's where the
Mhm.
National Cryptologic Foundation really focuses on the K to 12 spectrum, to help them understand that what's happening in cyberspace is no different than what happens in the physical space. It's just that you can't see it anymore. It's all the same motives, the same rationale. It's just different technologies that are being used to exploit. And so we need to figure out how to explain this a lot more. I know we really appreciated, because the National Cryptologic Foundation is funded by lots of really good donors.
Hmm.
One of them was the Gula Tech Foundation, and we were able to develop, we just released it, it's out on our website, a middle school booklet that begins to articulate some of these concepts of taking care of your data or data care. If you think about it from the medical profession, many years ago, we talked about medical profession, and people just thought about doctors and nurses. When they changed the language to healthcare, people then started thinking about operational therapy, physical therapy, the techs, the administrative people that have to take care of a hospital, all the aspects of taking care of our human health, ambulance drivers, ET. So people understood there was much more to the profession than just doctors and nurses. The data care thought is trying to look at that same thing to help the kids understand there's a wide breadth of opportunity in cybersecurity profession, more than just the computer scientist. We need the forensics people. We need the analysts. We need the cop mind, so to speak, to go after the adversaries. We need the administrators. We need the researchers, etc. And so I think where all of that is leading, to get back to the fear, is I think we're extremely vulnerable in the infrastructure, because a lot of people don't understand it and they haven't designed the systems to thwart the adversaries. So, I mean, the pipeline is a great example. I even read an article that the Nantucket ferry was attacked.
Hmm.
I mean, you wouldn't think about, oh, I need to protect the ferry. But sure enough, it was attacked and they had to stop operations. No real threat to the country, but they lost money.
I agree, and not even that. They're more vulnerable because they don't have, from a team perspective, they have enough defenders out there to help them.
Right.
So they're much more prone to an attack like that, just due to the fact that they're minuscule in size and don't have the capacity to protect themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. And there's over 500,000 openings if you go to cyberseek.org, positions. And we're
Mhm.
just not going to get there by dribbling at this. I mean, we've got to have some national level opportunities to get to the kids, to let them know that this, number one, is a fun job. I've had a blast in my 40 some odd years of doing this. I mean, my wife says I failed at retirement. Uh, uh,
Oh, that's awesome.
it's just fun. It really is fun to work this profession and to see how you're making a difference at the national level.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because we are in a new arms race,
Mhm,
right? So, we're talking about nation state developing AI,
mhm,
systems to defend, but also potentially use AI to attack. So the arm race is now moved from the physical to the kind of the cyber.
mhm,
And in order for us to be competitive, we require the talent. And
mhm.
the way we require the talent, these again, you would just what you mentioned, we have to groom these people from the time they're young. You don't become a master violinist, you know from the time like you start at 25. You have to start at 8 years old, right?
Exactly.
And if you
You
want
have
to
to
have it be
practice and practice and practice.
right, and if you want to be an AI scientist, that potentially will help us develop the next cyber defense, or cyber attack for that matter. You want them to start early. So first of all, let me talk to you about this particular topic, and then we kind of jump into the foundation and what you guys do, because
Okay,
it's, again,
cool.
fascinating. Um, so are we potentially looking at a Skynet, come the next several years?
Yeah, I really liked, in fact, I was reading a thing from Elon Musk on Skynet, and the fact he said, if we don't go bankrupt, we're gonna really succeed here. And I think there's a lot of that risk involved. But I think having uh, more opportunities to spread the risk to where you've got multiple sources of access to the network is going to thwart an adversary from cutting a single point of failure. And I think some of our critical infrastructure has single points of failure that are easy to kinetically attack that cause a cyber outage, denial of service. And so I think having industry like Elon Musk and the Skynet having various different opportunities to expand connectivity, especially where Elon, I think, is trying to make sure we get connectivity into those rural areas, the remote areas. I think we learned during the pandemic and the educational systems, we have deserts of internet broadband connectivity. And in those deserts, we're affecting the opportunities for underrepresented communities and for students to really gain the knowledge they need to gain, and for adults. You mentioned our veterans, for them to retool themselves, et cetera, to be in this environment. And so I think we don't have that ubiquitous connectivity that we would like to think we have. I mean, when you look at Verizon and Xfinity, and they show those maps, and T-Mobile, where all the color in the maps, right? Well, there's a lot of white in that map as well, where there isn't connectivity. And so I think having the opportunity to increase that connectivity and to provide it securely, to make sure that access control is there, the old CIA, right? Confidentiality, integrity, and availability, that we all historically talk about, are still valid concepts to make sure, and especially the availability part is there for everyone.
Now, Mark, if you had to basically create the same map, but for cybersecurity education, where will be the white area?
I think the white area dominates, unfortunately, and I think where you're going to find the pockets of cybersecurity is not surprising. I mean, you look at Silicon Valley, you look at the Northeast corridor here, you look at Texas, you look at Florida. Those areas are really meccas for cybersecurity, and it's not surprising that most of those are located close to military bases. It's not surprising that most of those are located next to NSA facilities, like in Georgia, Colorado, Hawaii, here in Maryland. And so where the industry is currently working the cybersecurity challenges, you're going to find excellent pockets. In fact, the K-12 Cyber Talk, a really interesting group of high school students who are so passionate about cybersecurity, and they founded this K-12 Cyber Talk because they wanted to ensure their fellow students understood cybersecurity, and they were concerned of the void in that knowledge. So these are high school students, not old people like myself, but high school students who started this. And there's many examples of that throughout the country, but it's very thin. I would say most of the space is probably white, and that's our problem today. Is we're hitting thousands of students when we need to hit millions of students.
So that's great, and obviously, you're failing at retirement right now. In the mission to fix that white space into cybersecurity education. So you're doing a great job, despite whatever your wife says. So the National Cryptologic Museum Foundation.
Right.
Tell me a bit about that initiative. What do you guys do? How it was founded? And more so, how do you get involved and potentially become part of the foundation?
Oh, thank you. And I think it's a great question. And the National Cryptologic Museum Foundation started many, many years ago originally in support of the National Cryptologic Museum. As you know, it's a private-public partnership the National Cryptologic Museum is a great location here in Maryland, and it has lots of unclassified artifacts now, declassified artifacts, about how we provide signals intelligence and information security for the nation that NSA can share with the public. Since it is a government-run facility, they needed a foundation to help raise funds for artifacts and raise funds for programs. So that's kind of how the National Cryptologic Museum Foundation started. Back in the mid 2000s, there was a desire because the museum's in an old hotel and it needed an upgrade. And so a lot of us retirees got together and said, hey, maybe you ought to build a new building. And so the National Cryptologic Museum Foundation started a program to develop the Cyber Center for Education and Innovation, a 79,000 square foot museum. It is fully designed. In fact, the steel is already purchased, et cetera. And so we're making great strides to build this new facility. And in doing that, many of our donors said, hey, we don't mind dedicating to brick and mortar, but it needs to be more than a museum. So back in 2017, when I retired, I was asked to come over to the foundation and begin developing an education program, which we have done now over the last couple of years, et cetera. Obviously, the reason I failed at retirement. And we've really built a very dynamic program. And in fact, we went through a name change. So because we're doing a lot more than just helping the museum, we've now rebranded ourselves as the National Cryptologic Foundation because we're doing a lot more in this educational space, as well as continuing to help the museum with artifacts and building this new facility. Go ahead.
So that's amazing. So I love the progression of from a brick and mortar museum to a much larger initiative. And it's a very lofty goal, and it's, I guess, worth pursuing because it's so big, right? So the idea is to go out there and fix that white space in education. So, and I'm sure you thought about it. What, in your opinion, would make the greatest impact if you had, one or two things that, everybody can do? We are all cybersecurity professional, the community that I've built is cybersecurity professional. And what can, individuals do to begin with? And then what do you think is like the biggest impact that we can kind of, individually do these days?
David, great question. And I think the opportunity to go to our website, cryptologicfoundation.org, and look under the education part. We have partnered with Dr. Melissa Dark out of Teach Cyber. It's another 501c. Dr. Dark is a retired Purdue PhD professor. Her PhD is in educational systems development. Her team and us developed what we call the cybersecurity curriculum guidelines. That is on our site, totally free. It's geared towards high school. Then we helped Teach Cyber in developing a full year-long class program for high schools, and that is free through the Teach Cyber site. We also have this middle school booklet for free on our site. Now, why do I mention those free resources in response to this question? We all need to be part of the solution. So we need to share with every single school, every single Boy Scout, Girl Scout, Girls Code, whatever organizations are out there. We need to share these resources, the curriculum guidelines, the actual in-class curriculum, and this middle school booklet, because in those resources that are totally free to anybody who wants to use them are resources to continue to help spread this word about cybersecurity and data care, and to help lift up, as we know, a rising tide lifts all boats.
Correct.
And so we want to lift up these institutions with good quality curriculum, good quality instruction. And a lot of these instructions can be modularized. You don't have to use them all at once. You can pull things out and use them. And so there's just a wealth of information. Plus, we also host what is called a cyber chat. It's through our partner, nepris.com. And so there are folks out there who have expertise in the cyber world. We host a session every single week during the school year, and we beam into over 8,000 classrooms, the potential of 8,000 classrooms, with given topics on given pieces of cybersecurity. On our website is an ability to share your expertise. We would love to have the listeners, love to have each of us individually say, what can I give back? And how can I share my expertise with these students to pique their interest? I don't know if you've heard of the Diffie-Hellman algorithm. Have you heard of the
Hmm.
Diffie? Okay.
Definitely.
Whit Diffie sits on our board,
Wow.
and Whit actually gave one of these talks to the kids, and it blew their mind.
Oh, I
Here,
bet.
the creator of the
Yeah.
Diffie-Hellman algorithm talking to these kids. I mean, it just blew their mind, and they loved it. Whit did a phenomenal job. He's a great person. I don't know if you've ever met him, but we cherish the fact that Whit sits on our board. And so it's people like that who can inspire these kids to think about cybersecurity, not only in protecting themselves against their use of the phone, but also thinking about joining us in this profession.
Yeah, I love that. And it sounds like there are two goals here. One is, in actuality, to create that cybersecurity awareness and training, education for the for that young population, right? So that's one. So they have them become smarter
Mhm.
about kind of the cyberspace, and everything is now cyber. You know, even the stuff you buy online, it's we can't disconnect from that at
Oh,
all.
the refrigerator is cyber now.
Correct. And my toaster oven can tell me
Right.
if
I
my
can
toaster
attach
is
it to your
toaster.
refrigerator.
And it's moving faster than we think. All the vehicles are like, we're gonna have wearables.
Mhm.
You can buy running shoes that tell you how well you do,
Yeah.
and so on. So that's one of the areas, the goal. And then the other one, it looks like it's more intangible. It's like, how do you make these young minds excited
Yeah.
about going to the space so they can pursue potentially higher education or pursue careers in the space. And I
Correct.
find, for not just for young generation, but even people that are just getting into the workforce or switching between, switching careers. What they don't know is what they don't know, in the sense that when people think cybersecurity, they think, okay, pen testing, they think
Right.
about, potentially network administrators and so on. But it's, you're nodding your head because you know where I'm going with this. It's so vast.
Yes.
It really is vast. Even like yourself, you are managing education program in cybersecurity. But when you take computer science, like I did for 4 years, you don't necessarily know that there's an ability for somebody like yourself to be managing an educational program. It's not
Exactly.
part of the. So how do we get these young minds to know what's out there from a quote unquote employment perspective, and let them think about and more broadly in terms of what's available?
That's a great question, David. And I think it's that $1 million question, right? It's that question of how do we stay the course, and make sure things happen that provide these students the information. And I think one of the challenges out of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission report talked about how do we enable cyber education, cyber enable education, and what are the different things we need to do. And I don't think there's a silver bullet here. I really don't. I think that the great work that the foundation has done, the great work that CISA has done, you have cyber.org, great friends and partners of ours. You have the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education, which is the folks who are pulling all this together, and they've done a great job. The Centers of Academic Excellence that NSA started and DHS joined. There's over 360, I think, of those throughout the country. And so we're making good progress. The challenge here is, how do we explode in some areas? How do we continue to provide it? I think we take opportunities like the pipeline. We take opportunities like the meat plant, and we leverage those in our communities. We try to inspire the Optimus clubs, the VFWs, all the different opportunities where we gather as a community, and we have the dialogue, we have the conversation, we keep the conversation present, And then we seek the industry donors who understand the return on investment. We have some really great donors that have provided us with some wonderful funds that have allowed us to do this work. They're seeing the return on investment because they're getting cybersecurity aware people as employees, which helps them. They don't have to train as much, et cetera, and it helps their infrastructure. And so I think as we understand that the cyber domain, and you, David, you put the nail on the head. Everything we buy, everything we do is now cyber enabled. And we have to understand this is our new livelihood. And so as we progressed in the kinetic world, where we put seatbelts in cars, right? We have all of the airbags in a car. Yep. We have, front end crush things in a car, right? Well, why did those things happen? Because we wanted to save lives. Yep. And so as we work in kinetic, we have to work in cyber and have it become infused in people's thinking. And we just have to stay the course.
And it's funny, Mark, that you mentioned the seatbelt, because that's an example I always bring, is saying that we didn't actually enforce seatbelts in cars until the cars were already driving, 60, 70 miles an hour. And after the fact, after there was a lot of casualties because people flew, from the cars during collision, and then there was a, seatbelt were enforced.
Right.
And so, I think, again, the cybersecurity education should be woven into our everyday life. I think there's some companies out there doing like a security minute, right, where like every time there's a meeting, they talk about some topic like for 1 or 2 minutes. They should have that in education as well, where maybe every day, maybe after the national anthem, you talk about maybe like for 2 minutes to talk about some cyber topic and what's the outcome, and just for because it cannot be separated from, again, what you mentioned, day-to-day life.
Well, David, here's another example that we did in the kinetic world. On one of my NEPRIS calls where I had 4th and 5th graders, right? And I was talking to them about cyber hygiene. Basically, how do you protect yourself on the electronic devices? Because the 4th and 5th graders are using these, right? And so I asked them about stranger danger. And that's a kinetic thing, right? That we as a country, we as a civilization talked about stranger danger, right? And so all the kids raised their hand. Oh, yeah. And so I asked, well, what is stranger danger? And these kids were able to articulate definitively what that meant. That their parents talked to them about don't talk to strangers if somebody approaches you, blah, 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 right? So they had a very clear understanding of stranger danger. Then I asked these kids, okay, how many of you play Minecraft or one
Xbox
of them,
Live?
Xbox Live, Fortnite, all these different games, right?
Yeah.
Now my grandson plays Fortnite and he also plays Minecraft, and he brought grandpa in, and I've been playing Minecraft with him, which is fun. I love playing Minecraft with my grandson, right? And so he was talking about, and he's very secure because he's got a grandpa that's in this business that lectures him, and he goes, "Oh, grandpa, I know." But he talked to me about how during these games he would get a, "Hey, I want to friend you," or "Hey, I want to talk to you," etc. And you'd have to click yes or no, etc., like that. So I asked these kids, how many of you friended or played with somebody in these environments that you did not know? And it was interesting. Some of the kids raised their hand, but I just sat there for a second. And these 4th and 5th graders were starting to put 1 and 1 together and started to understand, wow, that's the same as stranger danger. And so what we have failed to do as a society is to rapidly bring our kids who use this technology into the knowledge that what happens in the physical world is also happening in the cyberspace world, and the same rules apply. Don't friend somebody unless you personally know them. And because these could be, and I didn't talk about the predator nature chip to the 4th and 5th graders, right? But these potentially, and there are social media apps that are known predator environments.
Yep, and I think in general the internet is predatory.
Right.
Always ask yourself another question when you're doing anything, and it is sometimes very tough even for cybersecurity professionals to detect what's real, what's not.
That's right.
Uh, so, Mark, before we part ways, and it's been a real pleasure having you on the show here.
Oh,
Um,
thanks, David.
the it's a lofty goal, right? You're out there, making an impact. How would you measure success? Let's say we do the same thing again in 12 months,
Right.
because such a big goal. How would you track? And I don't know if there's a way for you to track these, maybe potentially shrinking white spaces
Right.
of lack of education. How would you track you being successful, actually making an impact?
Thank you, David. And that's the other $1 million question I'm always
We
asked.
ask it very, or like, what's like 5 bitcoins or
Right.
whatever that is.
This is the other question I'm always asked, especially by seniors who say, "Okay, what's my return on investment?" Right. And it is a tough question because many of us don't understand metrics. Many of us collect the wrong metrics, et cetera. But I think there's some simple metrics here as we're beginning, and it is a beginning. We will evolve. We will have better metrics in the future. But I think one of the metrics is how many schools, number one, are actually implementing cybersecurity topics within their school structure.
Mm,
How many of them potentially are using the cyber.org? There's another really good tools called Ring, another that are really focused on the rural areas. And then we have our Teach Cyber curriculum, which is very deep, very focused. It's meant for college credit. It's that level of education. So, how many high schools are doing this? How many middle schools have got our booklet? How many middle schools are talking about this in a way to their students? That's one metric. How many people are using these tools? Another more maybe softer metric is as we talk to students, how many of them are raising their hand that they have heard cybersecurity? How many are raising their hand that they know about data care, taking care of data, that it's their responsibility? How many of them are raising hands that, hey, I've thought about being in this profession? Much like when I go into a classroom and people say, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a doctor, I want to be, this or that. I'd love for someone to raise their hand without me cueing it and saying, hey, I'd like to get into forensics. I'd like to get into some of the professions in cybersecurity that are right now articulated in the NICE framework. So that would be, I think, a aesthetic metric of that. But I think the other harder metrics may be how many schools are actually implementing this. I know we work with Theorem Medium, who I don't know if you've heard of Schoolhouse Rock. Those are the folks who
hmm
work in that space. Do we have the public service announcements? I know you're seeing the public service announcements on getting your vaccine, right? Those are some really cool PSAs right now about showing people getting together and why they're getting together because they're vaccinated. So I would love to see PSAs out on the major networks about cyber. And I think working with people like Theorem Medium, trying to get some PSAs out there, I think would be another great metric.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you're right, it takes a village. It's not just you and the foundation. It's all of us together making an impact, and it will
And
take
that's
some
the most
time.
important thing, David.
Yeah.
It is working together. There's more work than than we have people to do the work. So let's work together, collaborate, and leverage off of each other.
Yeah, absolutely, Mark. So, how do people get in touch with you? And
Yeah,
if some people people want to get some more information, more insight, see if they want potentially help out. What's the easiest way to do that?
I think the easiest way for them to do that is go to cryptologicfoundation.org, which is our website. Sorry for the long name, but cryptologicfoundation.org. And on that page, not only will they see everything we're doing, but there's a contact us. And it's real easy for them to just say, hey, I'd like to know more. I heard, Mark Loepker speaking. put me in contact with him on the education page. There's lots of contact opportunities there. So I think that's probably the easiest, is to go to the cryptologicfoundation.org.
Super. And what I'm going to do is we probably should schedule this, maybe in a few more months, and then we'll keep tracking some developments. I'm sure you're going to have exciting. Listen, you're failing very well in retirement, so you're going to be very, very busy in the next foreseeable future, and I'm sure there's going to be other things that we can do and talk about. So again, thank you very much for joining the show, and looking forward to potentially seeing you in New York City and things are opening up.
Would love that, David. Would love to pop up. Sandy and I love New York. We love coming up and seeing Broadway shows. In fact, we saw Hamilton 3 days before Broadway shut down.
Wow, you're so lucky.
So we would love to come up and see another show. And so let's make that happen.
Absolutely, Mark. Thank you again. Thanks all for joining, and looking forward to seeing you in the next session.